We got a big update on Stetson Bennett and why he missed his rookie season, and also who's on the Rams Mount Rushmore. That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Ramley, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rams, your daily podcast covering your Los Angeles Rams. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're also available over on YouTube, so if you haven't yet, do us a huge favor and subscribe to the Locked On Rams YouTube channel. Trying to get to 14K before training camp, so join the party, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, hit that like button, and most importantly, let us know down below, who is your Rams Mount Rushmore? We're going to get into that in a little bit. My name is Doug McCain. Friends call me DMAC. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. I've been covering LA sports for over a decade, 24/7, Bleacher Sport, Dodgers Nation, the Rams for Locked On. And as always, I'm joined by the Rams pre, half, and post-game show host for the Rams flagship radio station, ESPN 710 LA. He's entering his 9th season covering your Los Angeles Rams, the People's Champ, Mr. Travis Rogers. You can follow him on X at Travis Rogers. And on today's episode, we're talking about the Rams Mount Rushmore. This is a very tough one. Also a update on Stetson Bennett. But first, this episode of Locked On Rams brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, Travis, we're going to get into that Mount Rushmore in our next segment. But first, an update on Stetson Bennett. The Rams backup quarterback is going to be competing with Jimmy Garoppolo, and with Jimmy Garoppolo set to miss those first 2 games, if everything goes right, we could see Stetson Bennett as QB2 for Rams' first 2 weeks of the season. Well, a lot of the big questions for Stetson Bennett are what happened last season. Well, he was on the Unreserved podcast with TJ Calloway, and the first thing I want to say is he said that he's going to completely get away from having a cell phone. He's going back to having a flip phone. He says, I'm going back. I got to get out the flip phone. So he's a flip phone guy. And this is someone, you look at his age, I mean, he's someone who used to hang out with Alexander Graham Bell, probably called him Al. He was good friends with him. But, I mean, thoughts on him going to the flip phone? Do you think that says something about, okay, his focus level and where he's at?
I think it says something. I don't know what it says about his focus level or anything else for that matter. I think it says that he's dealing with some stuff. I don't know what the stuff is, and I don't want to speculate what the stuff is because it's, quite frankly, it's none of my business. It's none of your business. It's none of anybody's business other than Stetson Bennett and him getting as healthy as he possibly can, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, whatever it is. Believe it when I see it. You know, I hope so. I hope that it works out. I hope that he's healthy. I hope that he shows up and he plays really well. And look, I hope they never have to use him, right? I hope that Matthew Stafford takes every snap of the entire season. And if something does pop up, that Jimmy Garoppolo is ready to step in and pick up the slack. But I hope that for his sake that he's healthy. But I have a flip phone instead of an iPhone. I'm doing this instead of that. Okay, cool. But I'm just going to wait and see until the performance. You can tell me all you want. You've heard me say this a million times, DMAC. I'm not going to go by what you tell me. I'm going to go by what you do. And that applies not just to the team, that applies to the players. And that's where I am with Stetson Bennett. Good for him. I hope it works out.
But the most important thing he said when he was asked about his rookie season. Now, the Rams, they selected him in the 4th round of the 2023 draft. Some people thought it was a stretch to trade up to go and get him, and he missed most of that rookie season, played in the preseason, but the rookie season, he missed all of it. So he missed most of that season last year, and he was asked why and what happened, and he said he went home. He said, I went home for a minute, kind of had to clear my head. I don't know. It was a bunch of everything all at once. It felt like just needed some fresh air. And, you know, the Rams and all that, they were gracious enough to let that happen. I just needed a little bit of a break. So the Rams clearly were accepting of whatever he was going to deal with last season. And they said, okay, go home if you need to. And it felt like it was more mental health issues and trying to clear his mind than anything else by what he says.
Yeah, look, I think it's important, and I know that, you know, he's older than the average guy coming out of college, and I'm not even trying to set up a joke here. He's, you know, a year or two or maybe even a little more older than that guys are typically coming into the league. But I also think that it's really hard to put yourself in anybody else's shoes when it comes to the amount of fame, the amount of attention, the amount of everything that was coming his way. You're talking about a 2-time national championship winning quarterback. You're talking about he's coming from a place that is absolutely bonkers for football at the University of Georgia. And that's a lot for anybody to handle, whether you're 22, 25, or 29 or whatever it is. And I could see where that could get away from a person. And I don't, like we've talked about, I don't know exactly what it is that he was dealing with, but it seemed like he needed a break from whatever it is that he was dealing with, and that the Rams gave it to, what choice do they have? They spent a draft pick on him, a relatively high one. So they're trying to get some return on that investment. But, hopefully it got worked out. Hopefully whatever it was that he was incapable of dealing with a year ago, that he's capable of dealing with right now. And I hope that it works out for him. But, I'm just going to wait and see what happens, because this stuff, sometimes it goes away, sometimes it doesn't. I'll leave it at that. Anybody that's dealt with people that are struggling with this kind of stuff, sometimes it's like you need a reset and you get one. And sometimes you need a reset and you get one. And then we're right back where we started. We'll see what it looks like. A year from now, I think we'll have a much better idea.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think today with social media and the way the media operates, that a lot of times you see a story and you try to connect the dots, and there's a lot of speculation. I think that he had the public intoxication arrest after the national championship in Dallas, and a lot of people just want to link those, so they made an assumption. But as you bring up, yeah, there's a lot going on after you win 2 national championships for Georgia as a player that came in as a walk-on, right, and made your way back to Georgia and found a way to have a lot of success. And Les Snead said that he was mentally exhausted. So, yeah, you could see how it could take its toll on you mentally. And the most important thing for the Rams is they say, look, it's better to have you do whatever you need to do to try to get something out of you versus forcing you to be here where you're not really going to be here, and then it's a true wasted asset. So I think the Rams are saying, look, might as well do everything we can based on this specific situation. I think that's something that the Rams are really good at, is tailoring, whether it's schemes, whether it's treating players differently, right? They treat Jalen Ramsey different than other players because they suit it and tailor it to each player's individual needs to try to optimize them. And I think that this is something along those lines.
And the thing that the Rams don't do, and I think this is, part of what you're getting at too, Devin, they don't really do drama, right? They really don't do what's going on there? They don't do noisy. What they do is professional. What they do is buttoned up. What they do is, look, every team's going to have players that are having issues. That's not, you can't insulate yourself from that altogether. But when something does bubble up, they nip it and they deal with it. I'm not saying that they just can the guy and move on to the next thing, but it's handled very quickly, very professionally, very quietly, and then it's kind of put over there to be dealt with away from the spotlight and everything else. I think the Stetson Bennett situation is a perfect example of that. They were not going to let this become something messy and noisy. They said, go take care of what you need to take care of, and then we can try to come back from there. And here's the beginning of that. And if it doesn't go well, they'll get rid of it pretty quickly again, I believe. They're not going to let this be. Third-string quarterbacks don't get to be messy and noisy. You just don't. You either do what you're asked to do, or they're going to move on from you. And I would imagine that Stetson Bennett understands that.
Actually, 100%. Sean McVay said that he looks good, in what he's seen from him so far since he's returned. He said he's got a good look in his eyes. He's been attentive in meetings. So things are trending in the right direction, and really the ball is in his court to go out there and perform. At the end of the day, when you get past these mental health issues or the break you needed, at the end of the day, it's a performance-based business, and either he performs and earns that position, or he doesn't and he won't be on this team.
Let me just put one thing in there before we move on to the next thing. You know what I don't want to hear my boss say about me? I pay attention in meetings. That's not good, right? If that's the bar that you're expecting me to clear, is that I'm looking at you when you're talking. Okay.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's like a bad kid who gets suspended a lot, and they're like, oh, he's turning in his homework now. He's on time. It's like,
he came to school every day this week.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So you want a cookie? Yeah.
Congratulations. No. Great.
But I'm rooting for Stetson Bennett. For the guy, for the team, and hopefully we don't hear too much about this season, because things are really back to normal for him, and he's going out there and playing football and doing what he loves the most. But coming up next, we are diving into the Rams Mount Rushmore. Who is on the Rams Mount Rushmore? That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and it is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and a whole lot more. So whether you are into speed, whether you're into power, whether you're into style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
And we are off and running here on Locked On Rams. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, a special shout out to those everyday listeners out there watching and listening to every single episode of Locked On Rams. We can't tell you how much we appreciate you. And if you haven't yet, join that Everyday Listeners Club. You want to get locked on for this upcoming season, which could be one of the most exciting seasons in recent memory. So definitely lock on and join that Every Listeners Club, and you won't miss a thing about your Los Angeles Rams. Now, Travis, I'm going to dive into the Rams Mount Rushmore. Before we give our names and talk about some players that we think should be on the list, I'm going to give out the list that NFL Throwback released recently. This is the NFL Throwbacks Rams Mount Rushmore. Jack Youngblood, Aaron Donald, Merlin Olsen, and Deacon Jones. So first big takeaway when you look at the NFL's list is, where are the offensive players? If you look at the history of the Los Angeles Rams and you're doing the big book of the NFL and the Rams are in there, you're going to be talking about the greatest show on turf. You're going to be talking about what they did on offense. So I don't think it truly tells the story of this franchise. Yes, all great players on that list, all players you could absolutely make the case belong on this list, but I think that to tell the story of the Rams, you need a couple offensive guys. We're going to talk about those guys coming up soon.
Yeah, I think so too. Now, what else is interesting about that list that you read? You're talking Jack Youngblood, Aaron Donald, Merlin Olsen, and Deacon Jones. Aaron Donald is the only one that had a little bit of time in St. Louis. The other guys are all Los Angeles Rams, right? And even Aaron Donald, I think when it's all said and done, you're going to think about him as a Los Angeles Ram. That's where he won his Super Bowl. That's where the statue's going to be. That's where the jersey's going to hang. So you're going to think about him as an LA Ram. We can come up with the list that we want, D-Mac, but I think what's interesting is you can almost kind of whack this thing right down the middle. You can have your all-time Rams franchise, and then you can have your all-time Rams Los Angeles. And I don't think there's going to be a ton of crossover. I think you can make two very complete teams with just a St. Louis group and a very complete team with just a Los Angeles group. And if you want to blend them together, great, but it feels like two separate entities, same franchise, but two very different times.
Totally agree. You can absolutely do that. Hey, with inflation, might as well just throw in 5, right? Add some more in there. But that's what makes it so tough. It's tough to get 4 when you have a franchise that is iconic, when you have a franchise that has decades and decades of great players running through this franchise. But I'm going to take my crack at it, and might as well start with the obvious ones, because the ones to debate would be the most fun. Well, most obvious one to me has to be Deacon Jones. And Aaron Donald's right there. It's tied. But my favorite thing about Deacon Jones is I want to start kind of at the back and then kind of move to the more modern players.
Sure.
Favorite thing about Deacon Jones is he is the player that coined the phrase sacking the quarterback. That is his phrase. It's his signature slap move. And he made 5 All-Pros, and he made 5 All-Pros, right? That's 2 more All-Pros than the games he missed during his career. That's insane to me. The durability, the longevity, the word sack comes from him. Deacon Jones, an absolute GOAT. He's on the Mount Rushmore.
He coined the term sack. He also had, like you mentioned, that signature move, the head slap that they outlawed because it was such a devastating move that Deacon would employ. He was on an episode of the Brady Bunch. Let's not throw that out. That has to count for something as well. He told me a story. I was very lucky that I got to know Deacon Jones a little bit later in his life. He was a wonderful guy, a lot of fun to be around. But he told me a story about the head slap that they were playing the Vikings one time, and I wish I could remember the name of the offensive lineman that he was matched up against. But Deacon was wearing him out the time before with the head slap. So the guy thought that what he was going to do is he removed the little piece of plastic that covered the screw that held his face mask in place. So it was just the screw, and he sharpened the screw. So the screw was almost razor sharp. So every time Deacon would go to whack him upside the head, he would cut himself on the hand. So Deacon saw what had happened, and the player for the Vikings said, okay, well, I put it into that. And Deacon said, that's not going to stop me. And he just kept whacking him on that screw that was out over and over again. He holds his hand to me when I met him at this point. He's telling me the story. There's a little hole in the middle of his hand where he whacked this guy over. Like, I'm not stopping. You can put whatever you want on that helmet. I am going to wear you out today. I'm getting to that quarterback. So, yes, Deacon Jones should be on the list.
Yeah, you're going to need a little more than a sharp screw to stop a guy like Deacon Jones, okay? That's going to not do the trick. But that really, if that doesn't epitomize a player and tell you how ferocious he was as a football player, I don't know what does. And also, the thing about Deacon Jones, they didn't have the sack stack. I mean, you didn't record sacks back in the day. But a few years ago, the NFL, they did research, and they went back and they watched his games, and they estimated that he would have had 173 and a half sacks during his career. That would put him behind Bruce Smith and Reggie White for the third most all time. So, yeah, he's someone that was registering a lot of sacks and one of the most iconic players. Now, number two,
Can I throw one more thing in there, G-Mac, before we move to number two? He also was a legendary performer on the Miller Lite Tastes Great, Less Filling commercials back in the early 1980s. So that needs to be mentioned as well. Just an absolute treasure of a guy.
All these things are considered, Travis, and honestly, as equal as their playing career. Television show appearances, movie show appearances, Madden covers, all this stuff matters to people like me. So I totally get it. I totally agree. And you love the personality of the guy too, for sure. Now, this next guy I think was equally as much of a lock as Deacon Jones, and that's Aaron Donald. And what more can we say about Aaron Donald that we haven't said on this show? But I just want to throw out some mind-blowing stats that I found for Aaron Donald. And, of course, Barry Sanders and him, the only players to go 10 years and 10 Pro Bowls. But when you think of Aaron Donald, the thing that sticks out to me is the attention that he drew from the opposing team, right? Double teams, triple teams, quad teams. Well, from 2018 to 2023, he was double teamed 40.5% of the time. And in that stretch, he generated 117 pressures against double teams. That was 33 more than any other defender, even with the double teams. I mean, Aaron Donald was an absolute god amongst men. Yes. To put it a little dramatically, and the stats back it up. The career backs it up. I want him back so bad, and I think about it every single day. But if he doesn't, I do think that part of his mystique will be that he came, he saw, and he conquered.
Absolutely. Look, it wasn't like just a really quick, really brief, like, man, if we only could have got a little more. It was a full 10 years, so you got the full thing. But it was nothing but excellence. I think for me, Doug, we were talking about these two. I agree with you. The two guys that are just, send them through. We really don't even need to talk about it are Deacon and Aaron Donald. I agree with you on that. But I think Donald's the only one on this list that we're talking about that maybe is the greatest position, the greatest player at this position ever, right? As good as Deacon Jones is, I don't think anybody's saying he's the greatest defensive end ever. He's one of the greats at that position, but Aaron Donald might be the greatest interior lineman ever, right? You don't say that about very many guys. And there's those pictures that we've all seen. I believe the most recent ones we saw against the Dolphins where there are literally 4 guys blocking him at once, and he's still putting pressure on the quarterback. He is one of one. We've never seen anything like it before. I'm with you. I hope that he comes back. But this Deacon Jones and Aaron Donald are the only two guys that I think that if you ask any Rams fan, they're going to be on virtually every single person's list.
For sure. And that's a great point in the fact that we're talking about all-time greatest Rams. Yeah. Aaron Donald is at the table of all-time greatest players.
Yes.
And in the conversation for greatest defensive player, I mean, Reggie White, Lawrence Taylor, Aaron Donald, you take your pick.
That's the list. That's the list, by the way. It's those, maybe Ronnie Lott, maybe, but there's That's the list. Aaron Donald's on it. That's why he's the
not a lot of seats at that table. I mean, for sure. And most sacks in Rams history with 111. And my favorite thing, we go from talking about Deacon Jones, where they don't even have a statistic for sacks. And then you talk about Aaron Donald's age, where there's a stat for every single thing you can imagine. And his career PFF stat, his career PFF grade is a 97.3. That's the highest for any player in NFL history.
Of course it is.
Travis, most players don't peak with one season at 97.3. That's his career grade. So, yeah, I mean, we could spend a whole show talking about Aaron Donald, but absolutely.
It feels low. 97 feels low.
Exactly. That feels like, hey, some guy was not doing enough like checks or enough analysis.
Somebody sneezed.
Save your time and make it 100. How about that? And go work on another player. Right?
Exactly.
For sure. But coming up next, we got the other two players on the Rams Mount Rushmore. That's coming up next on Locked On Rams. All right, welcome back to Locked On Rams. Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Travis, so now this is where it gets difficult because the other two, you can make the case for 4, 5, maybe even 6 guys. I mean, it's not on my list, but you could absolutely make the case for Jack Youngblood. You can make the case for Jackie Slater. Now, you can also make the case for Isaac Bruce. Isaac Bruce is someone who absolutely deserves some consideration. He's the franchise all-time leader in receptions with 942, receiving yards with 14,109, touchdown catch with 84, played 197 games with St. Louis. But the third guy on my list, I'm going with Marshall Faulk. Marshall Faulk, at his prime, you made the case for Aaron Donald as an all-time player, at his position, possibly the greatest ever. Well, Marshall Faulk, as far as any running back that plays position, you have Eric Dickerson, who absolutely deserves consideration. But Marshall Faulk, you made the case as the top 5, 6, 7 running back of all time.
Yeah, Faulk. The only reason that Faulk is not on my list is because he feels like a St. Louis Ram to me, and I tend to err a little bit more to the LA side as an LA guy. As somebody that has seen the LA Rams, I mean, obviously knew the greatest show on turf and everything else. And you're right that Torrey Holt is a good choice here. Isaac Bruce is a good choice. Kurt Warner certainly would be a great choice here. Orlando Pace, another Hall of Famer, one of the great offensive linemen of all time. And Faulk, of all of those great St. Louis Rams, I think he's probably the face of it, right? That he's really what made that thing go. Like you said, he was a great running back. He was a great receiver. He was an ultimate threat, a tough guy. He was incredibly durable. Like, there's nothing negative to say about Marshall Faulk at all, other than I like LA more than I like St. Louis. So he quite doesn't make my list, but I certainly do not have a good argument against him. He was a terrific player.
Well, he's third in franchise history in rushing yards with 6,959, but first in touchdowns with 58. Yeah. He's one of just 2 players in NFL history with 1,000 rushing yards and receiving yards in the same season. A 3-time All-Pro, a 4-time Pro Bowler with the Rams in 7 years. But you mentioned that funny story, that great story about Deacon Jones. Funny story I remember Steven Jackson telling about Marshall Faulk when he got to St. Louis. And Steven Jackson, running back, trying to find his way in the NFL, trying to see how these vets get it done, especially the great ones. He goes in the locker room his rookie year, and he looks at Aeneas Williams, and Aeneas Williams is doing like 2,000 crunches, and he's in the best shape of his life. Then he looks over at Marshall Faulk, and he's eating 4 hot dogs. And he's just slouching over, and he's not working out, and it's just unfair. Sometimes it's unfair with these guys. It's I have my brother-in-law is a trainer. He calls them dem genetics, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's dem genetics, right? But Marshall Faulk's on my list, but Eric Dickerson, Offensive Player of the Year, made 4 All-Pro teams, 7,245 yards with the Rams, 56 touchdowns. I think if he does not get traded, he's a 100% lock and probably close to being where Aaron Donald and Deacon Jones are as far as locks on the Rams Mount Rushmore, but I think it's debatable. Now, the 4th guy on my list, this is probably going to be a little bit disputed just because it was only 5 years with the Rams, but he won a Super Bowl and was probably the single biggest reason why, and that's Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner is on my Rams Mount Rushmore. I know he didn't have the longevity, but when he had his peak with the Rams, 41 TD passes in 1999, 36 in 2001 that also led the NFL. And this is someone who has a 97.2 pass rate. It's the highest for any Rams quarterback in history. And he won one Super Bowl, and I think he was partially cheated out of a second Super Bowl because of the Patriots. So sure. I think that at the end of the day, it's about raising that Lombardi trophy. And Kurt Warner is one of the reasons why the Rams have their first Super Bowl, and one of the biggest reasons. So he's on my Rams Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, again, another great choice. For my final two slots, I'm going to take one of the people that you mentioned already. I'm going to put Dickerson on there. I get it that he wasn't here for a super long time, but the time that he was here was just unbelievable. There really was not an answer for Eric Dickerson, and he was kind of a polarizing character for the Rams fans along the way. They'd be criticized for stepping out of bounds and all those things, but when you think of the Rams of the 1980s, you think of Eric Dickerson, you think of the neck roll and the goggles and all of the things, like just the look of him. He was such an iconic presence. He's the first guy to go over 2,000 yards since O.J. Simpson. And he was the guy. That was the position of that era. He was the best at it. And he kind of put some stuff out of reach that you thought you'd never seen again. So Dickerson goes on that list for me. I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball for my final guy, because I put it to you this way. I think, if we're kind of taking Mount Rushmore for great performances and telling the story of the history of the franchise, I don't think you can tell it without Sean McVay anymore. I really don't. I don't think you can tell that. He's been here for nearly 10 years. We're closing in on it. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. He's won one. He took a team that was dead in the water and made them one of the marquee franchises in the league. He's just getting started. Like, that we can even consider putting him on there at this point in his career. He's not even 40 years old yet, and he's absolutely out there killing it. I think that Sean McVay gets that last spot. He's the Teddy Roosevelt here. Like, it's Lincoln, Washington, and Jefferson. Yeah, that's cool. Like that for that's okay. I'm going to put McVay up there because I really don't think you can tell the story of this team without him. And he won the Super Bowl, and in large part, they won the Super Bowl because he showed up and led them to that next era of greatness.
Yeah, I love that pick. And you know how I feel about Sean McVay. I think if he wins multiple Super Bowls, especially with different eras, he won't even be on the Mount Rushmore. He'll be like his own Lincoln Monument. Okay. We can have him separate from because that's how important we know head coaching is. And you know how I feel about him. He's the most important, most valuable head coach in all of sports, in my opinion. I'll die on that hill.
Yeah, you're right. I'm with you. And you said if he wins another Super Bowl, I'm with you. Is there really a way that you can imagine he's going to coach another 20 years and he doesn't?
No,
right?
Yeah.
Isn't it a matter of, is it one more? Is it 2 more? Could it be something crazy? Could he win 3 more? Like, this feels like when LeBron finally won a title and you're like, okay, the dam broke. And how many is he actually going to end up getting? And he got 4. He went to the finals 10 times. Like, it's just there's just some guys that that one is not going to be the number. And Sean McVay is one of those guys, I think.
Absolutely. It's just really the burnout factor is the only thing you worry about with McVay. But yeah, that's our list right there. I think Merlin Olsen, I do want to say, I mean, look, I know I'll be ducking at some of these guys that want to see Merlin Olsen. And Merlin Olsen, I mean, never missed a game, 208 games, 14 Pro Bowls, 5 All-Pros. I mean, he was incredible. I mean, you look at some of these players from way back then, the Bob Waterfields, the Crazy Legs Hurst, the Norm Van Brocklins, the Tom Fears. No disrespect to those GOATs, but that's just my personal list. And by the way, one of these days too, I think guys like you and me, we appreciate the Mount Rushmore, but we got to do another show for the Mount Bustmore.
Yes, I love it.
Biggest bust in Rams history. I think Marshall Faulk for me had a lot to do with, of course, that was my guy in Madden back in the day, and I love me some Marshall Faulk. But that's to do for this episode of Locked On Rams. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMac_LA, and you can follow the People's Champ, Mr. Travis Rogers, at Travis Rogers. And until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.